The first time they all showed up at once, I thought I was dying faster than the doctors had predicted. Not because of the diagnosis, but because of the way they were smiling. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The light outside my living room window had that pale, tired look it gets in early winter. Thin, almost brittle. I was sitting in my usual chair, the brown one with the worn armrest where my thumb has rubbed the fabric smooth over the years, when the doorbell rang. Once, then twice, then a third time, longer, insistent. I wasn't expecting anyone. Since the diagnosis 3 weeks earlier, the house had been quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that hums in your ears at night. Stage 2 pancreatic cancer. That's what Dr. Mera had said, his voice steady, hands folded like he was discussing the weather. Manageable, he called it. At 60, I had learned that manageable is a word doctors use when they don't want to promise you anything. Before the diagnosis, my relatives had been busy. My younger sister, Raylan, always had a kitty party. My nephew, Rohan, was building his startup. My cousin Leela had back pain whenever I suggested we meet. Even my brother-in-law, Sanjay, who used to drop by unannounced for my lemon rice, had not visited in nearly 8 months. Life, they said, everyone has their own life. But that Tuesday, when I opened the door, they were all standing there. Raylan in her floral shawl, lips curved too wide. Rohan holding a box of sweets. Leela with a fruit basket so large she had to balance it against her hip. Behind them, I even saw Sanjay adjusting his glasses as if he were preparing for something official. For a moment, I couldn't speak. "Oh, Diddy," Raylan said, stepping forward and hugging me carefully. Too carefully, as if I might crumble in her arms. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" Her perfume was strong, jasmine. It stung my nose. I swallowed. "I did tell you 3 weeks ago." Yes, she said quickly, "but we didn't realize it was serious." Serious, the word hung between us like damp laundry. They all came inside without waiting to be invited. Shoes shuffled against the tile. Plastic rustled. The house that had been silent for days filled with voices that felt strangely unfamiliar. They sat on my sofa, the one my late husband Bryn and I bought 25 years ago when we first moved into this house. I noticed how Rohan's knee bounced restlessly, how Leela's eyes moved around the room, pausing on the old teak cabinet, on the framed photographs, on the brass lamp in the corner. "Are you eating properly?" Raylan asked. "Yes." "Taking medicines on time?" "Yes." "Did the doctor say how long?" She stopped herself. "How long?" I smiled faintly. "He didn't give me a calendar, if that's what you're asking." There was an awkward laugh, too quick, too loud. I went to the kitchen to make tea. It felt safer there. The kettle whistled softly as it heated. I stood there longer than necessary, staring at the steam rising, trying to steady the tightness in my chest. When Bryn died 6 years ago from a sudden heart attack, none of them had come this quickly. They had attended the funeral, of course, stayed a few hours, offered condolences, then left me alone with the silence of a house that no longer echoed with his footsteps. But now they were here, all of them. When I returned with the tray, I saw something that made me pause. Rohan was holding one of the framed photographs from the cabinet. It was the picture of Bryn and me on our 30th anniversary. We were standing in the garden, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "That's a nice property," he said casually. "Big plot, no?" My fingers tightened around the teacups. "Yes," I replied slowly. "It's our home." Of course," Raylan chimed in. "We were just saying you shouldn't be alone here. It's too much for you now. Too much." The word felt heavier than serious. Leela leaned forward. "Have you thought about arrangements?" "Arrangements?" I asked. "You know," she said gently, lowering her voice. "In case, just to avoid confusion later." There it was, not concern, not love, paperwork. I placed the tray down carefully. The cups clinked against their saucers, a small, sharp sound in the room. "I have a will," I said. "Bryn and I made one years ago." Their expressions flickered just for a second. "Oh," Rohan said. "Updated recently?" "No." Silence again, thick, measuring. Raylan reached for my hand. Her grip was cool, calculated. "We only want what's best for you, Diddy," she said softly. "You don't have children. We are your family." I looked at her face, the familiar mole near her left eyebrow. The slight crease between her brows when she pretended to worry. Family. The word felt different now. When they finally left 2 hours later, promising to return the next day with homemade soup, the house fell quiet again. But it was not the same quiet. It felt watched. I walked slowly to the cabinet and adjusted the photograph Rohan had moved. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, thinner than I remembered, eyes more tired. At 60, with cancer sitting inside my body like an uninvited guest, I had expected fear, pain, maybe even loneliness. I had not expected attention. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed every word they had said, every glance exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. The way Rohan had asked about updating the will, the way Raylan had said arrangements. And for the first time since the diagnosis, I felt something sharper than fear. I felt doubt, not about my health, but about my family. I told myself I was being unfair, suspicious. Illness makes the mind wander into dark corners. Maybe they were simply worried. Maybe guilt had brought them closer. But as I turned off the bedside lamp and the room slipped into shadow, one question refused to leave me. If I hadn't been sick, would they have come at all? I closed my eyes, listening to the ticking clock on the wall. Slow. Measured, waiting, and somewhere deep inside me something else began to wake up, not anger, not yet, but awareness. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual, not because of pain, but because of anticipation. It is a strange thing how illness rearranges your mornings. Before the diagnosis, I would wake at 6, stretch carefully, and shuffle to the kitchen to boil water for tea. I liked the quiet hour before the world remembered I existed. The soft scrape of the kettle, the faint call of vegetable vendors in the distance. The sun creeping slowly across the dining table. That routine had been mine for years. After Bryn passed away, it became my anchor. We had been married for 32 years, not a perfect marriage, no marriages, but a steady one. He had a deep laugh that filled rooms, a habit of leaving newspapers half-folded. He liked his tea too sweet. I would scold him every morning. "You'll get diabetes before retirement," I used to say. He would wink. "Then you'll take care of me." Life doesn't always follow the script we imagine. He left first. No warning, just a sharp pain in his chest one afternoon and then silence. For months after that, I would set 2 cups on the tray by mistake. Grief is quiet like that. It hides in habits. After he was gone, the relatives had come briefly. They had offered advice on selling the house. "It's too big for one woman. You can move closer to us. You don't need all this space." But I stayed. This house wasn't just walls. It was the place where Bryn and I planted hibiscus along the boundary, where we argued about curtain colors, where we celebrated anniversaries and mourned losses, where I learned how to live without him. At 60, the house did not feel too big. It felt earned, until the diagnosis. Now suddenly everyone thought it was too much. I made my tea slowly that morning. I sat at the dining table and looked around with deliberate attention. The small crack in the wall near the window, the wooden clock Bryn bought from Jaipur. The faint scent of sandalwood from last night's incense. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. At exactly 10:30 the doorbell rang again, right on time. I almost smiled at the precision. When I opened the door, Raylan stood there alone this time, holding a steel container wrapped in a cloth. "I made soup," she announced brightly. "Fresh vegetables, no oil." She walked inside without waiting for my reply. I watched her move through my home as if she were inspecting it. Her eyes lingered on the ceiling fan, the curtains, the corner shelves. "You haven't changed anything," she said. "Why would I?" I replied. She didn't answer. In the kitchen, she opened cupboards casually. "Where do you keep the extra plates?" "Why, in case guests come," she said lightly. Guests. It had been years since this house had hosted more than 2 people at a time. We sat at the dining table. She poured soup into bowls. Steam rose between us. "I was thinking," she began, stirring unnecessarily, "you should let Rohan handle some paperwork. He understands these things." "What things?" "Bank accounts, property documents, just in case." I looked at her carefully. "In case of what, Raylan?" She met my eyes. For a split second, something unguarded flickered there. Calculation, maybe. "In case you get tired," she said softly. "You need support." Support, it sounded kind, but it felt like pressure. "I'm not tired," I said evenly, "and I'm still capable." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Of course you are, don't misunderstand me." But I did. That afternoon, after she left, I went to my bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of my cupboard, the one Bryn and I had labeled important. Inside were neatly arranged files, property papers, insurance documents, bank details, our will signed and witnessed. We had written it 10 years ago. Everything was straightforward. If one of us passed, the other inherited everything. And after both of us, the house was to be donated to a local girls' education trust Bryn supported quietly for years. I remembered the day we signed it. "You're sure?" I had asked him. He had nodded. We have no children, let the house become something useful. At the time, it had felt noble, logical. Now, as I ran my fingers over the file, I realized something else. No one in the family knew. We had never announced it. We had simply done it. A small, private decision between husband and wife. I closed the drawer slowly. That evening, my phone buzzed. It was Rohan. "Mossy," he began cheerfully. "I was thinking maybe I can come tomorrow and help organize your finances just so you don't stress." I leaned back in my chair. "I'm not stressed," I replied. "But you shouldn't handle all that alone," he insisted. "What if something sudden happens?" There it was again, sudden, as if they were already rehearsing my absence. "I've managed for 6 years," I said quietly. "I think I can manage a little longer." There was a pause. Then his tone shifted just slightly. "We're only thinking about the future." "Whose future?" I almost asked, but I didn't. After I hung up, I walked to the veranda. The evening air was cool, neighbors' televisions murmured faintly. Somewhere a pressure cooker whistled. Normal life continued outside my gate. Inside my chest, something unsettled grew heavier. Over the next week, their visits increased. Leela arrived with fruits every other day. Sanjay came to check on repairs, examining the plumbing like a surveyor. Raylan called each morning and each night. It would have been touching if it had started before the diagnosis. I began noticing small things. Rohan asking casually how much the property was worth now. Leela mentioning that real estate prices had shot up in this area. Raylan commenting that maintaining such a big house would be a burden for someone in treatment. Each remark was wrapped in concern, each suggestion coated in sweetness, but underneath I felt the shape of something else. One afternoon, while Raylan and Leela were in the kitchen whispering, I walked in quietly. They stopped mid-sentence. "What were you saying?" I asked lightly. "Nothing," Raylan replied too quickly. "Just discussing whether you should hire help." I nodded, but later that night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the ticking clock again. Tick, tick, tick. I remembered something my mother once told me when we were young. "When people start being extra kind," she had said, "listen more carefully." At 60, with illness sitting quietly inside me, I had thought my biggest battle would be medical. I was beginning to realize it might be something else. The following Sunday, they all came again, this time with papers. "Just forms," Rohan said casually. "Power of attorney, temporary. So we can help if needed." I held the papers in my hand, the words blurred for a moment. Temporary help, signature. I looked up slowly at their faces, smiling, waiting, and for the first time since the diagnosis, a very clear thought formed in my mind. They were not preparing for my recovery, they were preparing for my absence. I placed the papers back on the table without signing. "I'll think about it," I said calmly. Raylan's smile tightened. Rohan's jaw stiffened. And in that small shift of expression, I saw what I needed to see. Not love, not fear, expectation. I did not sign the papers, and that was when their kindness began to change, not immediately, not openly, but in small, almost invisible ways. The very next morning, Raylan did not call. For weeks she had called twice a day, asking about my medicines. My appetite, my sleep. That Monday there was silence. I told myself she was busy. People have lives. But by afternoon, I realized something else. When affection becomes conditional, you can feel the shift in the air, like humidity before a storm. In the evening, Rohan texted. "Mossy, just checking, did you think about the forms?" No greeting, no mention of how I was feeling, just the forms. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Still considering. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, no response. I placed my phone face down on the table and walked to the veranda. The hibiscus flowers were blooming again, bright red against the fading light. Bryn had planted those himself, kneeling in the soil, insisting on spacing them perfectly. "They need room to grow," he'd said. Room. It was a simple word, and suddenly I understood how little room I was being given. Over the next few days, the visits became more strategic. Sanjay came alone one afternoon. "I was passing by," he said, adjusting his glasses. He rarely passed by before. He walked through the house slowly, commenting on the structure. "You know, older homes need upkeep, repairs can be expensive." "I've managed so far," I replied. He nodded thoughtfully. "But treatment costs money, you shouldn't drain your savings." "I won't." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "If you transfer ownership to someone trustworthy now, it avoids legal complications later." Ownership, transfer, legal complications. He spoke as if discussing a business deal. I watched him carefully, the slight tightening around his eyes, the rehearsed tone. Trustworthy? I asked quietly. Who do you suggest? Well, he said lightly, family is safest. Family. The word felt heavier every time they used it. That evening, I pulled out the property valuation documents I had received 2 years earlier. I had never paid much attention to the numbers, but now I read them carefully. The value had nearly doubled. I sat very still. For a moment, the pattern became clearer. Their timing, their urgency, the way they spoke of arrangements instead of treatment plans, it wasn't just fear of losing me, it was anticipation of gaining something. The next clue came unexpectedly. On Thursday afternoon, Leela arrived unannounced. I was resting in the bedroom and did not hear the doorbell immediately. When I finally reached the door, slightly breathless, she looked irritated. I've been ringing for 5 minutes, she said. I was lying down, I replied. She stepped inside, carrying a small bag. I brought some documents, she said casually. What documents? Oh, just information about assisted living facilities in case. I almost smiled. In case I decide to move, I asked. Yes, it might be easier, you'll have care, meals, company. And what would happen to this house? She blinked just once. Well, you could rent it or sell it. No point letting it sit empty. Empty, as if I were already gone. She placed the brochures on the table, glossy pages. Smiling elderly couples playing chess in sunlit rooms. I flipped through them slowly. Have you spoken to Raylan about this? I asked. Of course, she replied quickly. We're all worried. Worried, it sounded almost convincing, but then she made a mistake. You shouldn't delay decisions, she added. Markets fluctuate. Markets, not health, not comfort. Markets. After she left, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called our old family lawyer, Mr. Despand. He had helped Bryn draft the will. He answered on the second ring. Ah, Mrs. Sharma, he said warmly. How are you? There was genuine concern in his voice, not rehearsed. I've been better, I admitted. We spoke briefly about the diagnosis. He listened without interrupting. Then I asked carefully if I wanted to update my will, how complicated would that be? A pause. Not complicated at all, he said. Why do you ask? No reason, I replied, just reviewing things. He cleared his throat gently. Are you being pressured? The question startled me. No, I said quickly, but my silence after that must have spoken louder. Remember, he said calmly, you are under no obligation to transfer or sign anything unless you fully understand and agree. I know, I whispered. After I hung up, I sat for a long time in the quiet living room. The ticking clock sounded louder than usual. That night, I made tea and carried it to Bryn's photograph. I placed the cup beside it, an old habit I hadn't practiced in years. They think I don't see, I murmured softly. The room, of course, did not answer, but in the stillness, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, clarity. The following weekend, they came together again. This time, the tone was different, more direct. Raylan sat upright, hands clasped tightly. We need to be practical, she began. I am practical, I replied. Rohan leaned forward. Masi, what if something sudden happens? We'll be stuck in court for months. You seem very concerned about court, I said calmly. He flushed slightly. We just want to avoid complications. For whom? I asked. Silence, a small, fragile silence. Sanjay broke it. You don't have children. After you, it should stay within the family. There it was, not disguised, not softened. I looked at each of them slowly. Did I ever promise you this house? I asked. They exchanged glances. No, Raylan admitted, but it's understood. Understood by whom? Her lips pressed together. I leaned back in my chair. For weeks, I said quietly, you've visited more than you have in 6 years. You've brought soup, fruits, brochures, forms. Not once have you asked how I feel beyond a sentence or two. Not once have you sat with me in silence. You talk about ownership, transfer, market value. My voice did not rise, it did not need to. Rohan shifted uncomfortably. You're misunderstanding, he muttered. Am I? I asked softly. The air in the room felt heavier. For a moment, I saw something raw in Raylan's face, frustration. We're thinking ahead, she snapped. You're being emotional. Emotional at 60 with cancer in my own home. I almost laughed. Instead, I stood slowly. I need rest, I said. We'll discuss this later. They left soon after, this time without promises of soup, without exaggerated hugs. When the door closed behind them, the silence returned. But it no longer felt lonely. It felt protective. I walked to the cabinet again and looked at the photograph of Bryn and me. They've shown their hand, I whispered. And for the first time since the diagnosis, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt resolve, because now I knew their visits were not about love, they were about inheritance. And if they thought illness had made me weak, they were about to learn something else. The betrayal did not arrive with shouting. It arrived in an envelope. 3 days after our uncomfortable Sunday conversation, a courier rang my doorbell. I was in the kitchen, peeling apples slowly when the knock came firm, official. Mrs. Demi Sharma. The young man asked, "Yes, please sign here." The envelope was thick, legal-sized, my name typed neatly across the front. I closed the door gently and carried it to the dining table. For a long moment, I just stared at it. There is a particular kind of dread that feels like déjà vu, as if your body knows what your mind is still trying to avoid. I opened it carefully. Inside were photocopies, my property documents, bank account summaries, a draft agreement titled Family Asset Protection Arrangement. My breath slowed. Attached was a note. "Mossy, we thought it would be easier if everything is structured properly now. This protects your assets from unnecessary taxation and complications. We've spoken to a consultant. Just sign and we'll take care of everything. Rohan protects your assets from whom?" I read the draft agreement carefully. Temporary joint ownership, power of attorney to Raylan, secondary authority to Rohan. If I became medically incapacitated, control would transfer automatically. My fingers trembled slightly, not from illness, from recognition. They had not simply suggested help. They had already consulted someone. They had already prepared documents without telling me, without asking, without my consent. I sat back slowly in my chair. The clock ticked. Outside, a dog barked somewhere down the street. I felt oddly calm. When betrayal is subtle, it hurts. When it becomes visible, it clarifies. That evening, I did something I had not done since Bryn's death. I called his old friend, Mr. Verma. He had been like an elder brother to him, practical, observant. When he heard my voice, he paused. "Demi Jai, is everything all right?" "No," I said honestly, "but I'm managing." I explained everything, the visits, the forms, the envelope. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. "They moved quickly," he said finally. "Yes, too quickly." I swallowed. "Was I blind?" I asked quietly. "No," he replied gently. "You were grieving, then you were sick, and they were waiting." The word struck harder than any accusation. Waiting. For what? I whispered. For opportunity. That night I did not sleep, not from fear but from thinking. I walked through each room of my house slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the bookshelves Bryn built himself. The kitchen tiles we argued over. This house was not just an asset, it was history, memory, labor, love, and they had reduced it to market value. The next morning Raylan called. "Did you receive the documents?" She asked casually. "I did, and I'm reviewing them." Her tone sharpened slightly. "There's nothing to review, it's straightforward." "For you," I replied calmly. "Not for me." She sighed dramatically. "Diddy, why are you making this difficult? We're trying to help." "Help yourself?" I asked quietly. There was silence. Then her voice hardened in a way I had never heard before. "You don't trust your own family?" "Trust." The word sounded almost ironic. "I trust what I see," I said. "And what do you see?" I took a breath. "I see people who became attentive only after learning my house is valuable." Her breath caught. "That's unfair," she snapped. "Is it?" Another silence. Then she said something that changed everything. "You have no children, who else should it go to? Not who else will take care of you, not how are you feeling today, just inheritance." I closed my eyes. "When Bryn was alive," I said slowly, "you visited twice a year. That's not. When he died, you suggested selling this house within a week. We were thinking of you. And now," I continued evenly, "with cancer in my body, you send agreements without asking me." Her voice rose. "Because you delay everything. What if you die suddenly?" The word landed in the room like broken glass. Die suddenly. There it was. Not fear, impatience. As if my timeline was inconvenient, I felt something shift inside me, a line. "You seem very prepared for that possibility," I said quietly. She did not deny it. Instead, she changed tactics. "We've already discussed this with others," she said. "Everyone agrees it makes sense." Others, so it wasn't just Raylan and Rohan, it was a family discussion about my assets. Without me, I felt heat rise in my chest, not anger but something colder. Betrayal tastes metallic. "Who is everyone?" I asked. She hesitated. "Leela, Sanjay, even Mama Jai thinks." "That's enough," I said softly. The calm in my voice surprised even me. "I will handle my affairs myself." "You're being stubborn." "I'm being aware." She hung up on me, the dial tone buzzed in my ear for a long moment. That afternoon I met Mr. Despand in person. I carried the envelope with me. He read through the draft agreement slowly, adjusting his glasses. "Did you authorize any of this?" he asked. "No," he shook his head. "This is aggressive." The word felt accurate. "They're positioning for control," he added. "Especially with the medical incapacity clause. If I refuse, you have every right. And if they contest later," he leaned back. "Is your will still as originally drafted?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Then they may not be expecting that." I held his gaze. "What do you mean?" He studied me carefully. "They likely assume you will leave the property within the family." I did not answer, because suddenly I understood something crucial. They were not just acting entitled, they were confident enough to prepare documents. Confident enough to discuss me as if I were already fading, confident enough to believe I would surrender quietly. I walked home slowly that evening. The sun was setting, the sky washed in pale orange. I stopped at the gate and looked at the house, my house. Their greed had done something unexpected. It had awakened me, not into bitterness, but into strategy. If they were planning ahead, so would I that night. I did not cry, I did not pace, I did not call anyone. I sat at the dining table with a notebook and a pen. If they were preparing for my absence, I would prepare for my presence. There is something illness teaches you very quickly. Time becomes sharper, conversations become clearer. And people reveal themselves when they believe you are too weak to notice. I was not weak, I was sick. There is a difference. I opened my notebook and wrote 3 questions. 1. What do they expect? 2. What do they fear? 3. What do I want? The first 2 were easy. They expected ownership. They feared being excluded. The third question took longer. What did I want? I looked around the room. I did not want revenge. I did not want humiliation. I wanted dignity and clarity. The next morning I called Mr. Despand again. "I would like to update my will," I said calmly. He did not ask for reasons this time. "Come tomorrow," he replied. Before leaving for his office the next day, I did something deliberate. I called Raylan. "I've decided to review my will," I said. There was a brief silence. "That's good," she replied quickly. "We can all sit together and discuss." "No," I said gently. "I'll handle it privately." Her tone sharpened. "Why privately? We are family." "Exactly," I said, "and family should trust me." She did not respond. That afternoon at Mr. Despand's office, I read through the original will again. The clause was clear. After my death, the house would be donated entirely to the Shakti Girls Education Trust, the same one Bryn had supported. I had not told my relatives. There had never been a reason. Now it felt like protection. "Do you want to change anything?" Mr. Despand asked carefully. I considered the question. "No," I said finally, "but I want to strengthen it." We added medical clarity, we added witness documentation, we made it legally airtight. And then I made one additional request. "I want a recorded statement," I said. He looked at me thoughtfully. "Explaining your decision?" "Yes." "For future disputes?" "Yes." He nodded. That evening I sat in his office with a camera placed on the desk. My voice was steady as I spoke. I explained that I was of sound mind, that I had made this decision with my late husband, that no one had pressured me, that I did not wish to transfer ownership during my lifetime, and that my relatives were aware I would manage my affairs independently. It was not dramatic, it was clear. When I returned home, I felt lighter, not because I had defeated anyone, but because I had reclaimed control. The reaction came faster than I expected. 2 days later, Rohan arrived without warning. His expression was tight. "Masi, we heard you met a lawyer." "Who told you?" I asked calmly. He hesitated. "Does it matter?" "It does," I replied. He exhaled sharply. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be." "Am I?" "We're only trying to help," he insisted. "But you keep shutting us out." "Help with what?" I asked quietly. "My treatment or my property?" His jaw tightened. "You're being suspicious." "I'm being observant." He stood abruptly and began pacing the living room. "You know how expensive medical care can become," he said. "If something happens, we'll have to step in anyway." "Why would you have to step in?" I asked calmly. "Because we're your only family," the phrase echoed in the room. "I have friends," I said gently. "I have legal advisors, I have myself." He stopped pacing. "Do you plan to give this house to charity?" he asked suddenly. The question was sharp, direct. My pulse slowed. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you're acting secretive." I studied his face. He already suspected. Even if I did, I said quietly, it would be my choice. His expression changed, the politeness slipped. You would give it to strangers, he snapped. After everything family has done, I almost smiled. What exactly has family done? I asked softly. The room went still. He opened his mouth, closed it, then said something that removed all remaining doubt. This property should stay in blood. Blood, not love, not care, blood. And what if blood is conditional? I asked. He stared at me as if seeing someone unfamiliar. You've changed, he muttered. No, I replied gently. I've become aware. He left shortly after, no goodbye, no promise to return. That night Raylan called. Her voice was no longer sweet. Are you planning to cut us out? She demanded. I was never including you, I replied calmly. You assumed. She gasped softly. You're punishing us. I'm protecting myself. For what? She snapped. We haven't done anything. I let the silence stretch. Then I said quietly, you sent legal agreements without asking me. That was practical. You discussed my property with extended relatives. That's normal. You spoke about my death as if it were scheduled. There was a pause, a long one. Then she said the most honest thing she had said yet. We thought you'd understand. Understand what? That my illness had accelerated their expectations? That my body had become a countdown? I understand perfectly, I said softly. She hung up. The next week was quiet. No visits, no soup. No brochures, no paperwork, and in that silence the truth became undeniable. Their concern had been transactional. When the transaction failed, the concern disappeared. It hurt. Of course it hurt. Not because I wanted the house to go to them, but because I had wanted their love to be real. One evening, I sat on the veranda again, watching the sky darken. I realized something important. They were not villains in a dramatic story. They were ordinary people, afraid of missing opportunity, afraid of being excluded, afraid of regret. Greed often wears the face of fear. And yet, that did not excuse it. My illness had exposed something fragile in our relationships, something that perhaps had always been there. And now there was only one thing left to decide, whether to confront them publicly or let silence speak for me. Silence lasted 9 days. 9 days without a call, 9 days without fruit baskets, 9 days without someone suddenly passing by. It was almost peaceful, almost, but silence has texture, and this one felt heavy like air before a public storm. On the 10th day, the storm arrived, not through my door. Through the neighborhood. I found out by accident. I had stepped out to buy fresh coriander from the corner vendor. The winter sun was mild, the kind that warms your shoulders without burning. As I waited for change, Mrs. Kapoor from across the lane approached me slowly. Her smile was polite, but her eyes held something else. Demi Jai, she said gently, I heard you're planning to sell the house. I looked at her carefully. Who told you that? She hesitated. Well, Raylan mentioned something about you not being able to manage anymore. There it was, a strategy shift. If they couldn't control me privately, they would shape the narrative publicly. I thanked her calmly and walked home without another word. Inside the gate, my steps slowed. They were not just impatient. They were preparing witnesses. That evening, I received 3 phone calls from distant relatives I rarely heard from, all asking the same thing in different words. Is it true you're liquidating assets? Are you moving into assisted care? Do you need help managing the sale? Each question carried assumption. Each assumption carried pressure. I answered them all the same way. No, short, clear. By nightfall, I understood what had happened. They had begun presenting me as incapable, fragile, unable to handle my own affairs. It was subtle, strategic, and dangerous. Because once the story of incapacity spreads, it becomes justification. The next morning, Raylan arrived unannounced. This time, she did not carry soup. She carried irritation. You've been telling people we're after your property? She demanded before even sitting down. I closed the door quietly behind her. I haven't told anyone anything, I replied calmly. Then why are neighbors asking questions? Perhaps you should ask yourself that, I said, her face flushed. We were just preparing everyone, she insisted. So there's no confusion later. Preparing them for what? For transition, she snapped. You can't manage forever. I am managing, I said evenly. For now, she shot back. But your health, my health is being monitored by doctors, I interrupted softly. Not by you. She paced the living room the way Rohan had days earlier. You're isolating yourself, she said. No, I replied, I'm protecting my boundaries. She stopped and faced me. Do you even know what people are saying? I met her gaze. Do you? There was a long pause. Then in a voice lower and sharper than before, she said, "If you donate this house, you'll regret it." Regret, an interesting word. "I won't," I said simply. Her eyes widened, so now she knew. "You're serious?" she whispered. "Yes." She laughed once, short, bitter. "You'd rather give it to strangers than your own blood?" "I would rather give it where it was intended," I replied. She stared at me for a long moment, then something cracked. "You think we're greedy?" she asked. "I think you're afraid," I said quietly. "Of what?" "Of missing out. The truth, when spoken calmly, is harder to fight." She looked away first. "You're being unfair," she muttered. "Perhaps," I replied. "But I didn't start this." She left without another word, but she did not leave quietly in spirit. 2 days later, I received a formal letter, not from them, from a legal firm. It stated that concerns had been raised regarding my mental clarity due to medical stress. It requested medical evaluation to ensure I was fit to manage substantial assets. I read it twice. Then a third time. My hands did not shake, but something inside me hardened. They had escalated from persuasion to social narrative to legal pressure. This was no longer about inheritance. It was about authority. I called Mr. Despand immediately. He read the letter carefully. "This is intimidation," he said flatly. "Can they do this?" I asked. "They can request, but without evidence it holds little weight." I sat back in his office chair. "They're trying to paint me unstable," I said quietly. "Yes, and if I react emotionally, it strengthens their argument." I nodded slowly, so that was the trap: provoke, frame, control. When I returned home, I did not cry. I did not call Raylan. Instead, I made 3 phone calls. First, my doctor. I requested a comprehensive cognitive and mental health evaluation. Second, Mr. Verma. I informed him of the letter and asked if he would be willing to stand as a character witness if needed. Third, the Shakti Girls Education Trust. I scheduled a meeting. If they were going public, so would I. The evaluation happened 2 days later. Memory tests, reasoning tests, psychological assessments. The doctor looked almost amused at the end. "You're sharper than most 60-year-olds I see," he said kindly. "I'll take that as a compliment," I replied. He prepared an official certification of mental competence. Signed, stamped, undeniable. The meeting with the trust was simpler. I sat across from the director, a woman in her early 40s with steady eyes. "My husband believed in your work," I said softly. "So do I." We discussed legal transition processes, public announcement procedures, memorial acknowledgement. It felt purposeful, not dramatic, just aligned. And then 1 week later, I did something deliberate. I invited everyone: Raylan, Rohan, Leela, Sanjay, even the extended relatives who had been calling. I invited them for tea on Sunday afternoon. They arrived curious, cautious. I had arranged the living room neatly, tea prepared, documents placed carefully on the table. When everyone settled, I spoke calmly. "You've all expressed concern about my ability to manage my affairs." Uncomfortable shifting, I continued. "So I've obtained formal medical certification of my competence." I handed copies around. They read silently, faces tightening. Then I placed another document on the table. My updated, legally reinforced will. Raylan's breath caught, Rohan's jaw clenched. "It remains consistent with what Bryn and I decided years ago," I said evenly. "This house will be donated to the Shakti Girls Education Trust upon my passing." The room fell completely silent. No one moved, no one spoke. Then Leela whispered, "You're serious?" "Yes." Sanjay cleared his throat. "You're making an emotional decision." "No," I replied gently. "I'm honoring a commitment." Rohan stood abruptly. "You're choosing strangers over family." "I'm choosing purpose over pressure." Raylan's eyes filled, not with sadness, with frustration. "You've humiliated us," she said quietly. I looked at her carefully. "No," I replied. "You humiliated yourselves." The truth does not shout, it sits in the room and waits. And that afternoon, it waited. No one argued loudly, no one screamed. They gathered their papers, their pride, and they left. But this time the consequence was visible. They had tried to frame me, and I had responded publicly with clarity. After that Sunday, the house felt different, not quieter, clearer. There is a difference. When tension finally breaks, the air changes. It becomes honest. Even silence becomes honest. For the first 2 days, no one called, no one texted, no one sent fruit baskets or forwarded health articles. It was almost as if I had died socially. I made tea on Monday morning and sat in my usual chair by the window. The winter light filtered through the curtains, soft and pale. I noticed something small. My hands were steady. For weeks, there had been a low hum beneath my skin, a quiet vigilance. Listening for the doorbell, watching for hidden motives. Now that hum was gone. In its place, something steadier had settled, not victory, not pride, just alignment. On Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Raylan. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was not sharp this time. "It was tired. You embarrassed us," she said softly. "I told the truth," I replied. "You didn't have to do it in front of everyone." They were already discussing me in front of everyone. Silence. I could hear her breathing. "You've made things permanent," she said. "They were always permanent," I answered gently. "You just assumed otherwise." She did not argue. For the first time in weeks, there was no strategy in her voice, only disappointment. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "Then explain," I replied. Another pause. "We thought if it stayed in the family, it would mean something. And giving it to education means nothing?" I asked. "That's different." "How?" She struggled for words. "It's not blood." There it was again, blood, as if DNA alone created entitlement. "I have blood," I said softly. "It's running through me right now, fighting, surviving, that's enough." She exhaled slowly. "You've changed," she whispered. "No," I said gently, "you're seeing me without assumptions." She did not respond to that. We ended the call quietly. No resolution, no reconciliation. Just truth sitting between us. Over the next few weeks, something unexpected happened. Distance became selective. Leela stopped calling entirely. Sanjay sent one brief message about wishing me well and nothing more. Rohan unfollowed me on social media, not that I posted much. Raylan called occasionally, but the warmth was different. Polite, measured, and strangely I did not feel abandoned. I felt revealed. Because when affection withdraws after inheritance disappears, it clarifies what the affection was built on. Meanwhile, my treatment continued. Chemotherapy is not dramatic in the way films portray it. It is repetitive, quietly exhausting, a metallic taste in the mouth, a heaviness in the limbs. Some mornings I would sit on the edge of the bed longer than usual before standing, but through it all, something inside me felt anchored, not because I was brave, but because I had removed the noise. One afternoon, while resting on the veranda, Mr. Verma visited. He brought oranges, real ones, no agenda attached. We sat in silence for a long time before he spoke. "You handled it well," he said. "I handled it calmly," I replied. "That's the same thing." I smiled faintly. "Do you think I was harsh?" I asked. He considered. "I think you were clear, and clarity feels harsh to those who benefit from confusion." His words settled gently in my chest. Clarity feels harsh. Perhaps that was what they were reacting to, not cruelty, just removal of ambiguity. A week later, I received a letter from the trust. They had formally accepted the future donation. They had also invited me to visit the school anytime, so I did. It was a modest building on the edge of the city, brightly painted walls, girls in simple uniforms reciting lessons in unison. When I walked through the corridor, one of the teachers introduced me quietly as a supporter. No mention of property, no mention of illness, just presence. One small girl approached me after class. "Are you someone important?" she asked shyly. I almost laughed. "No," I said gently, "just someone who believes you are." She smiled, and in that small, unguarded smile I felt something that had been missing for weeks, not validation, purpose. On the drive home, I thought about blood again. Family is not always about who stands to gain when you fall. Sometimes it is about who stands beside you when there is nothing to inherit. Back at home, the hibiscus were blooming again. I trimmed the dry leaves slowly, carefully. Life, I realized, continues whether people approve of your choices or not. 2 months passed. My health stabilized somewhat, not cured, not doomed, just steady. The relatives adjusted to the new reality. They no longer asked about documents. They no longer hinted about transfer. Occasionally, someone would mention, "You should reconsider." I would smile gently and change the subject. And slowly the conversations shifted, from property to weather to recipes, surface level, but calm. One evening, Raylan visited quietly. No agenda, no paperwork. She sat at the dining table and looked around. "You're still strong," she said. "I never wasn't," I replied. She nodded slowly. "I was afraid," she admitted. "Of what?" "That after you, there would be nothing left of our side of the family." I considered that. "This house is not the family," I said softly. "People are." She looked down. "We thought you'd choose us." "I did choose you," I replied gently, "when I didn't expose how far you were willing to go." She met my eyes then, and for the first time in months there was no defensiveness, only recognition. It was not a dramatic reconciliation. No tears, no apologies, just understanding. And sometimes that is enough. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something important. Illness reveals more than test results. It reveals intentions. And sometimes the diagnosis is not of the body, but of relationships. I was 60, I had cancer. I did not know how long I would live. But I knew this: I would not let fear dictate my legacy. When I was first diagnosed, I thought I was losing control of my body. I did not expect to almost lose control of my story. At 60, you begin to understand that people react to illness in different ways. Some lean in with love, some lean in with fear, and some lean in with calculation. I do not tell this story to shame my family. They are not monsters. They are human. They were afraid of being left out, afraid of regret, afraid that something valuable might slip through their fingers. But here is what I learned. When someone begins to treat your life like a timeline and your home like a future transaction, you must pause, you must look carefully, and you must decide whether love is being offered or whether access is being negotiated. Illness did not make me weak, it made me attentive. It forced me to ask a question many of us avoid. If everything I own disappeared tomorrow, who would still sit beside me just to hold my hand? Not to discuss paperwork, not to secure signatures, just to sit. If you have ever faced something similar, if you have ever wondered whether people were visiting out of care or convenience, I want you to remember this: clarity is not cruelty, boundaries are not betrayal, and protecting your legacy does not mean you love less. It simply means you understand your worth. I am still here, still fighting, still living inside the walls my husband and I built together. And one day, when I am no longer here, this house will carry laughter in classrooms instead of arguments in living rooms. That feels right to me. Now I want to ask you something gently and honestly. If you were in my place, would you have done the same? Tell me in the comments. And if this story spoke to you in any way, stay a little longer. Subscribe. Share it with someone who might need the reminder. Sometimes the hardest diagnosis is not in our bodies, it's in the people around us. And sometimes that knowledge is the beginning of peace.